Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Big at the Back podcast. My name's Tom, I'm hosting, and I'm joined once again by Matt Higgins. Matt, how are you?
We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming. Yeah, I am good. I'm back, as you say. I had a nice holiday. You probably can't tell by the lack of tan. But yeah, it was very nice to get away for a little while. But now I've come back and it's even hotter here and I'm trying not to melt.
Yeah, we're doing this in the middle of the day on Tuesday, the 19th, which is the hottest day on record in about 100 years or so. Something absolutely ridiculous. So our brains aren't entirely with it today, but we're definitely giving it a go. It's probably a fair assessment.
Yeah, if there's even more rubbish in this than usual this week, you know why. It's the hottest day on record, and it's probably only going to get hotter for the next few hours. So God help us all.
Yeah, we're not going to be doing this for a few hours based on the heat. So last week we had our friend Stephen join us on the podcast. It gave his thoughts on Spurs, Arsenal, Liverpool, and a brief look at FPL. But this week we're picking up where we left off before Matt came in, and we're going to talk through the midfield options and the forward options. But before that, as we said, from our first draft, we promised there would be a million changes. I don't think either of us have really looked at FPL that much, but I'm guessing we both made a few changes. So, Matt, why don't you talk me through what your draft's looking like at the moment and talk me through your thinking behind the decisions?
Yeah, there haven't been many changes. There's been a few, particularly I wanted to get another big defender in because we are big at the back. So I already had Trent in there and I wanted to get Robertson in there as well. So I had to rejig around to make him fit in the side. So my two goalkeepers remain the same as before with Sanchez and Caballero. And then my defensive five as things stands are Chilwell, Reece James, Justin, Trent and Robbo. So that is, I think, pretty big at the back. I'm living up to the name there. A midfield five of Martin Odegaard, Luis Diaz, Jack Grealish, Jadon Sancho and Bruno Guimaraes. I'm still, as things stand, going without Salah. That, as I say, that will almost certainly change going into the first week of the season when I absolutely bottle it. And at the moment, I've got a front three of Gabrielle Jesus, Erling Haaland, and Awaniyi from Nottingham Forest, who's just signed from Union Berlin, having bagged about 13 goals in the Bundesliga last season. So I thought I'd get him in, see if he can be that sort of budget striker that can enable you to use money elsewhere and hopefully pick some points up along the way. So that's where I'm sat. What about you, Tom?
I like it. In terms of budget strikers, we'll talk about it in a minute, but I actually really like Brighton Undav that's just signed as an option, but I think he's not going to start immediately, so that's maybe one to discuss in a bit. My team has changed a little bit. I've only looked at it twice in the last 2 weeks, but I've just made wholesale changes to it. So I'll run you through it, then you can give me your thoughts. In goal, I've got Nick Pope. I think he's the best of the 5 million goalkeepers. Across the back, I've got Robertson, Trent, Zinchenko, Walker, and Tomiyasu. In the middle, I've got De Bruyne, Salah, Mount, and Sancho. And up front, on his own, I've got Gabrielle Jesus. The thinking there is that I trust De Bruyne to play more minutes than Haaland and to get more points than Kane over the first X number of games. So I've gone De Bruyne over an expensive striker. That might be completely ridiculous and I'll probably bottle it like you. But I think it's fun to create a draft with De Bruyne in over a Kane or Haaland at the moment.
No, I like it. I think you've got very good points there in regards to strikers in general, especially last year, not really being worth the money. I think we've seen that reflected a bit in the pricings that we've seen so far this season, and especially what we spoke about with the pricings in the episode a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot more room for flexibility, and it's good to have these ideas. You can look back as we go into that first week of the season, all the drafts we've done, and probably go with nothing that's like any of them, but we'll see. And hopefully when it comes to our joint team, we'll do well as well, but probably not.
Yeah, maybe for our joint team, we'll just forego midfielders and strikers entirely. Just all the budget. But no, I totally agree. I also thought as well, I've literally just looked at the team and thought, could I downgrade Gabrielle Jesus to Callum Wilson and upgrade Mount to Bowen. I think that would be a worthwhile move. But then the problem is 0 Chelsea players. So I don't know. There's a lot of tinkering to do when it comes to drafts for me.
It's going to be a never-ending thing, isn't it? And if you want to do that as well, your issue is West Ham's early run fixtures aren't particularly great. So that's why there's no Bowen in my thinking at the moment. It'll be like, there'll always be, if anyone's going to get some West Ham players in, it's going to be me, obviously, because I'm going to back my boys. But the early run of fixtures don't look particularly good. I do go into every season with an impending sense of doom and pessimism. So
I don't know. I think defensively there could be something said for Cresswell. But that, in terms, he's probably the only one I'd be looking at from West Ham at the moment, just because of those opening fixtures. But cool. This week's podcast is going to be focusing a lot more on the midfielders and the striking options moving forward for the new season. And I think it's really interesting how we can set this out, particularly around the price points and the fluidity behind it. So you've got the players of the top price bracket. So anyone that's a double-digit price. So the likes of Salah, De Bruyne, Heung-min Son, and then to a lesser extent, Sterling and Bruno in midfield. And then up front, you've got the likes of Kane and Haaland as the main two you're going to be looking at. So looking at the midfielders, I think in that top bracket, it's a really interesting conundrum. What are your thoughts looking at that bracket at the moment?
I think if you've got, obviously it depends on everyone's strategy. I think Salah is obviously the one that's going to have such a higher percentage ownership, especially going into that first game of the season against Fulham, as Liverpool seem to traditionally always get a newly promoted side on the first game of the season, and Salah often does bag. So I may be crazy in not having him in at the moment, which is probably why I'll change my mind. De Bruyne and Son, I feel like Son is almost one of the only players whose price is sort of done him no favours. He's probably outpriced now when he's on that same bracket as De Bruyne and only $1 million less than Salah. I feel like his percentage is going to drop a lot this season in terms of ownership. The one that really interests me now is Sterling. Now that he's gone to Chelsea, I think if he hits the ground running there, it could be a really good signing for all parties, for City that didn't want him anymore, for Chelsea, and for Sterling because he's going to get a lot more game time there. So he's one person I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on. In that first run of fixtures. They've got a fairly good run at the start of the season, so if he can start off well, then I can see his ownership going up quite early.
Yeah, same actually. I really like Sterling as an option. It depends if he does well in pre-season, but if he does, I will probably look to bring him in. I also think he makes Mount a better option as well in that midfield because I think him and Mount will combine really, really well. I do you think in that top bracket, though, and we're looking at the top bracket here, one player you didn't mention there that I'm really interested in is Bruno Fernandez. Because if Ronaldo goes, I think Bruno Fernandez becomes an option again. And it's a real toss-up between Bruno and Sterling. Let's not forget, before last season, Bruno was often the go-to captain over Salah. He was the top-scoring FPL points getter in the season before last. And it's the only year, actually, Salah hasn't been the top scorer since he's joined the Premier League. I think Bruno, in the right team, with the right system, without Ronaldo, could become an amazing asset again. So he's one I'm definitely keeping an eye on. And if Ronaldo goes, he'll probably go straight into the team.
It was strange. And we did say, and a lot of people said at the start of last season, it's going to be interesting to see how that Ronaldo-Bruno relationship worked. And it just didn't work, did it? So if he can be sort of the main focal point of that attack again going into next season, and they are making a lot of signings. They signed Sandro Martinez this week. Obviously, Ten Hag is building the team in his image. He's got a lot of players that he's worked with before, which can sometimes work, can sometimes go against the manager as well. And if it doesn't work, then you've got to get rid of a manager and bring in a manager that's working with a load of players that he doesn't want to be working with. But that's a conversation for another day. It will be interesting to see. I think he's definitely got the potential to be a top point scorer this year. But Ten Hag has said he doesn't want Ronaldo to go. He's in his plans. It's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds going into sort of the next month or so.
I think Ten Hag has to say that, though, really. I think they're going to be playing without Ronaldo next season. He's obviously looking to go off to PSG or wherever. I really like KDB, but I think KDB versus Son is a debate to be had. On the basis that last season, the second half of last season, Son was the best player to own in FPL, as I found out to my detriment. And that's arguably the thing that pushed you so far ahead of me in the second half of last season. I went with Kane, you went with Son. So I do think Son is going to have my eye on him. But in terms of the premium midfielders, over the last 5-6 seasons in a row, they've always outscored the premium attackers. Now, this could change this season with Haaland and Kane, but if you're going to ask me where my money's going, I think it's midfield rather than up front, because the premium midfielders are historically the top points getters in the game. In that top price bracket, De Bruyne, Salah, and Son are the big three. You can only ever have a maximum of 2 out of 3. I've gone with KDB and Salah at the moment, but Son could feature and could come in.
I've gone for none of them.
That's a really good reflection on you for this season.
All of my midfielders are between 6.5 and 8. Oh, no, sorry, 6 and 8, because I've got Bruno in there as well.
Okay, well, let's talk then about the 8 million bracket, because this is a really interesting bracket. And I think the first player I want to speak about here is Luis Diaz. I think he's criminally underpriced at 8 million in FPL. I would love to have him, but I can only have 3 Liverpool players. So in my team at the moment, what I'm thinking of doing is dropping Robertson for Cancelo and then swapping Mount out for Luis Diaz, potentially. Or maybe Robertson for James and getting Luis Diaz and freeing up another million elsewhere. There's a few different things I could do with it. But I think Luis Diaz is a really, really attractive option in that 8 million bracket.
Couldn't agree more. And that's why I've gone with him and I haven't gone with Salah. I think he's an absolute bargain in that price range. Straight into that Liverpool front three, with obviously Mane having left for Bayern Munich. So there's less, well, you'd like to think there's less risk of rotation there for once. I'm sure there's still things that Klopp can do to wind us all up as fantasy football managers, but that's why he's in my team. I think he's a great shout, and I completely agree. He is very much undervalued at 8.
Yeah, even compared to the rest of the 8 million midfielders, he is by far and away the strongest one. Kulusevski is an interesting option. In pre-season, Spurs have been lining up with Richarlison on the right, which is sad because Kulusevski was so good last season, but they haven't spent 50, 60 million on Richarlison to be sitting on their bench. So I think Kulu, his limits in that right wing role are severely reduced. For me, that makes him a non-option. What do you think?
It's a shame, isn't it? I completely agree with you again. It's not a shame that I agree with you. It's a shame that having done so well, having come in last season, I was on him at a very early stage when he came in and got a couple of returns early on after his transfer, his loan in January. So it is a shame. I think he's going to be probably more bench fodder for Spurs this season, potentially more of a wing back at times as well, depending on how exactly Conte is going to line up with that back 5. It is annoying because he was fantastic last season, but when you look at the other options you've got in this price bracket now, he is probably one of the least attractive.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's talk about the other options then, because I'm seeing a lot of drafts with Bukayo Saka in. And though he was good in stages last season, I don't get it personally. He got 179 points last season. He's been bumped up to 8 million. But last season, he was on penalties, which he won't be this year. Martinelli's ahead of him and Gabrielle Jesus is ahead of him. There's more attacking threat from Arsenal, which means points are more likely to go around. Now, Saka is a very, very good player, but I think he's overpriced at 8 million.
I wouldn't necessarily say I think he's overpriced. When you look at the points last season comparative to the other players that he's around in the same price bracket, I think it's probably a fair enough pricing. But I think similarly to you, I think he's a less attractive option when you look at the business that's been done at Arsenal. He was sort of had fits and starts last season. He never really had a consistent run of form. So I wouldn't necessarily say he's a bad option. He's not in my thoughts at the moment. And to be honest with you, I don't think he will be. I just think there are better options around in those price brackets. When you look at the likes of any of the other ones, really, Mount and Maddison, I think are both very good shouts. and also the two City lads in Mahrez and Foden, who have now got less competition in their area of the pitch at City.
Mahrez, Foden, and Grealish as well, theoretically, because I think those three are going to occupy the two wing positions for City. Actually, Bernardo's there as well, potentially coming in on the left. So it depends how Pep lines up, but I think Foden, Mahrez, both looking better options this season than they were last season alongside Jack Grealish. Maddison was in a lot of my early drafts because he was so good at the end of last season. He got the most points out of everyone that's 8 million or below last season with 181, more than Saka, despite being injured for half the season, despite being in the Europa Conference League and not playing. Is Maddison being really underlooked?
I think he could be as well. Like you say, I think he's got a lot going for him. He's on set pieces, and he's got very good set piece delivery. Like you say, if he can get a good run without injuries and he hasn't got to worry about European football, he's definitely in with a shout of getting some big points this season. A lot will depend on how Leicester come around again next season. Obviously, they were a little bit disappointing last season. I think, for me, he's one to watch rather than one that's going in straight away.
Yeah, I really like him as an option. I think he played far less games than any of the other options in that price bracket. And here I'm not talking Kulusevski and Diaz because they're out of that conversation really. But he's got less games and more points than Saka, than Mount, than either of the City guys. I think he's a really real potential option for our teams from the get-go. And in their first game, they've got, I think, Nottingham Forest or someone along those, or Brentford, that's it, Brentford. So I think that he could get a lot of points very early on and I think he's going to be really overlooked by a lot of FPL managers.
I think he's definitely he's going to be there or thereabouts. But I was just scrolling down a little bit down the prices, and one name jumped out at me. And this happened while I was on holiday. Obviously, I knew it happened, but it hadn't really factored into my thinking. And that's Christian Erickson signing for Manchester United and being at a 6.5. I think that's a potential bargain as long as he gets minutes and a lot of minutes. In that sort of Ten Hag system, I can see him doing really well.
See, I was listening to another podcast, I can't remember which one, and they were saying, actually, considering that Man United dressing room, there's a very good chance Christian Erickson has been signed as much for his off-the-pitch influence as on it. I think on the pitch, he's competing directly with Bruno Fernandez for a spot in that side. There's no way he's getting ahead of Bruno. Rashford and Sancho surely are the first choices on the wing. So I disagree. I don't know how much game time Erickson get. I think Rashford and Sancho are both better options from a United midfield standpoint.
I think it depends on who. Like, if Ronaldo doesn't stay, then you can probably see Rashford being pushed back up into more of a traditional number 9 role. They've still got Martial, but I mean, what even is happening with him anymore? Okay. Which then leaves you with.
Well, he's done really well in the friendlies under Eric Ten Hag.
Yeah, but I mean, that's friendlies pre-season. I know they beat you 4-0, so we won't talk about that one too much. But I think that could leave you with the likes of Erickson, Sancho, Bruno as that sort of 3 behind Rashford up front.
Potentially. A lot of it does hinge on Ronaldo as well. In terms of the 8 million price point, then I guess we've spoken a little bit about Bowen, but I think Jadon Sancho is another one that could really come flying out. It's his second season. And even if we're moving down to the 7 million bracket, we've got the likes of Bernardo, Silva, Barnes for Leicester, and your favourite player, Wilf Zaha.
I knew you were going to bring him up. Why have you done this to me?
It's just ruined my mood. Is there a world this season where you say to Zaha, I'm not playing the game with you anymore. I'm going to have you in my team for the off, and you're going to be in there for the whole season. Is there a world?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It doesn't exist.
So he's a hard avoid for you.
Yeah, I can't do it anymore. I've been burnt far too many times before, and I'm just not going there again.
Fair enough. I won't push you on it. Another one that I know Stephen brought up last week was very interesting was Phil Coutinho in that 7 million bracket. Now, I really don't like Coutinho because when he exploded big. I think game week 26, we had him and he got about 29 points or something stupid. But he got 11 blanks in a row at the end of the season. So for me, I wouldn't be touching him with a barge pole from a fantasy perspective. What are your thoughts on Coutinho and actually all of the players in that 7 million price bracket?
I think Coutinho could be an option early doors, depending on how Villa are lining up. But they have a few good fixtures to start the season, and then it turns a little bit. I'm thinking about game week 4 or 5 when they start playing the likes of Arsenal, and I think Liverpool are in there as well somewhere, or maybe a City. I can't remember. So if you look at that, I think he could be a potential one if you're thinking about that early wild card, because you're going to take him out then anyway around week 4 or 5. So he's definitely potential in there, but I don't think I'd be touching him to start with. Like you say, I think he ended the season very disappointingly. So it'll be hard to find a way to get him in there. I mean, elsewhere around that bracket, I'm not touching Zaha. We've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Bernardo's another one that's always a good option, but you never know with Pep Roulette, so it's always difficult to say there. And then if you come down a little bit further in your 6.5s, I've got Erdegaard in at the moment. I think his actual style of football was very impressive towards the end of last season, but it didn't necessarily translate into big returns in FPL. He's often the one that plays the ball that gets squared and then gets finished, so he doesn't actually get an assist, he doesn't get a goal, but he is instrumental in the way they play. Another one that's interesting for me in that same bracket at 6.5 is Alan St. Maximin, who's back as a midfielder this year and not as a striker, which definitely does him a big favour.
Yeah, I know FPL Northerner was quite critical of Alan St. Maximin. I think Alan St. Maximin is a real option, and he, in my opinion, is competing with Marcus Rashford in that 6.5 bracket for the best player to have. The reason I would be tempted to go with St. Max is because he's just more of a fun player, right? He is genuinely such a fun player to watch playing football that you want him to do well, and having him in your team just makes that want even more. So I really, really like St. Maximin as an option. And even if you're looking at it from a purely statistical standpoint, they've got a decent start to the season. St. Max is definitely going to be playing alongside Wilson in that attack. St. Max down as a midfielder with a fresh summer, so no injuries, is bound to get a load of points early doors right off the bat. So St. Max is definitely in my thoughts for the start of the season.
That's a big shout. He's guaranteed points, like everyone. You heard that, ladies and gentlemen. Guaranteed.
2 points a game, guaranteed. Yeah, I love St. Max as an option, and there's a very, very good chance I have him in my team at the start of the season.
Yes, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I've gone with Bruno Guimaraes as my Newcastle midfielder. He's a little bit cheaper and obviously worked wonders for them in the second half of that season. It's going to be difficult, I think, for him to carry that form over. It always is. But it'd be very good if he would do that for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think with Bruno Guimaraes, there's a challenge of he got about 5 goals from 1.7 expected goals. So he was really, really overperforming that. So I think that's a question mark over the long-term viability of having someone like him in the team. Whereas if you look at St. Max, it's a much, much better ratio, and he gets a lot more chances as well. So that's why if you've got the extra 0.5, I think it's worth going for St. Max there. Looking at the budget midfielders, and we're looking at 2 categories, 2 price points, 5.5 and 4.5. And this is depending on how your team is structured. So if you're looking at the 5.5 players, most people have been going for Pedro Neto from Wolves. So what are your thoughts on Pedro Neto?
Yeah, he's been in so many teams, hasn't he? He seems to be the template pick. I don't think he's a bad pick looking at his underlying stats, but I mean, obviously last season he was severely hampered by injury. So that obviously didn't do him any favours. But the season before that, he was pretty damn impressive. I think looking at him now, he got 5 goals and 8 assists for 124 points. So he's quite young as well, so he should bounce back from injury. He's had the whole off season to get fit and prepare. So if he can find that form of 2 seasons ago, then I completely understand why people are going nuts for him. But I also think it's a bit of an overreaction this early on, really, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. And you touched on it there. Everyone's owning him. So if he has a couple of bad weeks, I think everyone starts selling him for another option. If everyone starts selling him, his price drops. Suddenly, you've got a total team budget of 99.9 million, which rules you out of moving to several other players whose prices would remain unchanged. So as an FPL manager, I actually think he's a bit of a trap. So he could be a net negative on a lot of teams if he doesn't start well. And I don't think he will start well because Wolves just can't attack. So for me, he's a hard avoid. The other guy in the 5.5 bracket that I was tempted by looking at that bracket, because it's very slim pickings, but it was Jacob Ramsey for Villa.
Yeah, had a great sort of spell at the back half of last season. He is an exciting player as well. I think if I was going to go for one of that two, I'd probably go for Ramsey. I just think it's more of a differential, which isn't necessarily a big thing early in the season to have your differentials. You want to get points on the board. But like you say, with the option to then lose money on Neto or potentially gain money on the other, I think Ramsey's slightly better choice for me. But like you say, it's quite slim pickings in this area of the pitch. You've got your Southampton midfielders, you've got the other ones that are quite interesting are Eze and Elise at Palace, who I would much rather get in my team than Zaha.
Yeah, I agree. I just think the 5.5 option, and the reason I haven't bothered going for any 5.5 midfielders is they're also uninspiring, and also I just don't really want any of them in my fantasy team. That's why I've actually just tweaked my team around based on this conversation and based on just getting my thoughts out with you. And I've got a 4.5 midfielder, and that's it. So the lowest price bracket for midfielders is 4.5. And there's two names I've had mentioned, two names that I think are worthwhile. First is the popular one is Andreas Pereira, who's just moved to Fulham. He's going to be getting playing time every week. He's going to be getting the occasional attacking return. Really good 4.5 option. The other one is that De Silva from Brentford, who has been injured for ages, but looks very good in pre-season, got a couple of goals. Again, you're not expecting loads of points from him, but as a 4.5 midfielder to fill that spot, at least you're getting 2 points every week, is the theory. So, I don't know, any thoughts on those two? B, is there anyone else you'd be considering that?
I think Andreas Pereira is a very good shout. Like you say, coming from United to Fulham, he's almost guaranteed to be playing week in, week out. And with the sort of football that they played coming back into the top tier, working off Mitrovic, who should actually get some game time this time around in the Premier League. So I think he's probably the slightly more... Oh, he's going to be the favourite pick, isn't he? Let's be honest. Everyone's going to be going for him. De Silva, I think, is a good shout, but it's been a long time out of the game. It's hard for him to come back in, especially I feel like the Brentford team has changed quite a bit over the sort of last 6 months. I know they've lost Erickson now, but it'd be interesting to see if he can just come straight back into that team and pick up where he left off. So for me, it would be probably more edging towards Pereira. But yeah, the other options in that sort of price bracket are very uninspiring. You've got your Spurs guys in Skip and Winks, who, I mean, let's be honest, you're not going to be going near either of them, are you? You've got the rest of the Fulham midfielders. You've got some Leeds players in there, and you've got your like lower down the ranks in City, like the kids. So I've seen Jack Cole back in a lot of drafts as well, and he doesn't play. So I think people just assume that because they recognise the name, he must be good because he played in the Premier League a few years ago.
Yeah, he's an awful pick. But I think ultimately you're having these guys to sit on the bench in a second or third sub spot to get a couple of points a week. So I think De Silva and Pereira are probably the best ones. I think Pereira the best one, but De Silva if you want to be a bit different.
You're not going to mention James Milner in this bracket?
He takes the Liverpool spot, so absolutely not. But yeah, I think that's a good thoughts on the midfielders. My current midfield is, as I said, I was tweaking it during that conversation, but it's Salah and De Bruyne, and then Maddison, St. Max, and Pereira across as my five in the middle. So I think that gives a bit more balance as well. That brings us nicely onto strikers. So let's talk through forwards. And we've touched on Kane versus Haaland already. That's the premium striker discussion. I don't think we want to spend too long on it. And actually, FPL Mates did a really, really detailed analysis on the Kane versus Haaland debate that's going on. But from your perspective, have you got anything else to add around that conversation?
No, not really. It is the proven Premier League commodity in Harry Kane, and it's the new shiny toy in Erling Haaland, who has had some injury concerns, but he also obviously has a fantastic record of scoring goals when he plays. So I think it's a bit of a coin toss. It's, do you want to be potentially a little bit more risky or a little bit more flirtatious with Haaland, or do you want to go with the guy that the guy that brought you to the dance in the first place in Harry Kane?
Totally agree. With that, my style would tend to veer me towards Kane, but it's really, really tough to tell between the two. Looking at the other forwards, it gets very, very interesting because you've got Ronaldo as the only other premium forward at 10.5. I think because of how the season's structured, if he ends up staying and you're wildcarding in game week 8, he could be a really good option. Just at that price bracket, I think it's very, very attractive potential if he ends up staying and playing a lot. Then you've got Jamie Vardy, who always starts the season strongly, but at this point, we're just not going to touch Vardy with a barge pole, right?
Yeah, I mean, his injury record now is his hamstrings are going. He's not quite got the consistency that he has before. If he gets a run of games, then he's going to score goals, and you can pretty much rely on that. But you never know when it's going to end. An injury is only just around the corner. I think if you've got that much money to spend, the one that I would have liked to have gotten in was Darwin Nunez. But I think he's Liverpool surely aren't going to spend that much money on a striker and not put him in their team.
Yeah, I think he's guaranteed starts. But the problem is he takes the Liverpool spots, and you've got 4 players who are essentially must-haves at Liverpool already in Trent, Robbo, Salah and Diaz. So Nunez would be a 5th choice Liverpool asset. So the limits on 3 Liverpool assets really, I think, limits Darwin's playtime. He could go really under the radar and be a really good FPL option. There's a chance he could be top scorer this season. But until we see that firsthand, we're not going to sacrifice one of our other Liverpool spots to make it happen.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, isn't it? There's too many good assets. Let me put it to you this way. If there was one of those 4 Liverpool assets that you mentioned that you were going to drop for him, who would be he's the most expendable?
So the most expendable is Diaz, because I think the other 3 will get more points than Diaz, despite Diaz's price. I think and then it's got to be one of the two fullbacks. It depends how they start the season as well. Robertson in the second half of last season got the most points, the most returns, but Trent in the first half got the most points, the most returns. So it's whoever starts the season stronger effectively, and whoever's on form, you can almost flip between the two. Bit of a non-answer, but I think with those 2 Liverpool fullbacks, it's so impossible to say who's going to do better, which is why I've just said, sod it, I'm getting both.
Yeah, same here. It is just a coin toss, isn't it? And we had that conversation so many times at the back end of last season. It just rinse and repeat.
I think there's some interesting options when it comes to strikers now. In the 8 million, Gabrielle Jesus is the clear favourite. His ownership on FPL is now higher than Salah. And the reasoning is he's a proven Premier League goal scorer. He's coming to a team where he will be the star. He played 45 minutes in a friendly and bagged 2 goals. He's going to be on penalties. He's going to be the focal point of that Arsenal attack. So I think he's the obvious option in that bracket. The other players in that bracket, Firmino, you're not touching, obviously. Kai Havertz is in there, who I think is a complete avoid. But then Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Timo Werner could be excellent differential options as a second striker. What are your thoughts on them?
Werner, I don't know. It depends really how Chelsea are going to. Is he going to be their central striker? Is Sterling potentially going to be more of a false 9? They played such a false 9 role last season. Havertz obviously played there quite a lot with Lukaku's disappointing form. So it's really hard to pick between sort of Werner and Havertz for me. I think we're only obviously going to have one, but neither of them inspire me. I think there's too much risk in either one. It's a bit of a coin toss. Calvert-Lewin's a bit more of an interesting one for me if Lampard can sort of turn that Everton ship around. But obviously that is a big ask from the way they sort of performed in the back half of last season. Yeah,
and I think actually the real value is if you move further down that list. So 7.5, I was really disappointed to see Ollie Watkins at 7.5, given his Miega returns last season and Patrick Bamford as well. If either of them had been 7 or 6.5, I think they'd be really good options. But I think they're just being priced out of it by that 7.5 mark.
Yeah, they've got the English player tax, haven't they? They seem to have crept into FPL as well as just in general. They're their form suggests that they should be a little bit lower than that. I couldn't see them being a 6.5 per se, but I think a 7 probably would have been a little bit more doable in terms of squeezing them into your team.
I mean, Ivan Toney is 7, and he was much better as an option than either of them last season.
And Raul Jimenez.
And Raul Jimenez could be. Well, you're saying that Wolves have good fixtures to start the season. Raul Jimenez is going to be in the line. I think that's 7 million. Ivan Toney and Raul Jimenez are options. 7.5, I think Wilson is the player to go for. Back in the last season, he was awesome. I think he's great. Looking at the around 7, 6.5 there, we've also got Mitrovic in there. Now, talk to me about Alexander Mitrovic.
Are we doing this dance again? I feel like it's Groundhog Day all over again, isn't it? We've been here so many times before.
It's a different Fulham side. Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
Scott Parker is a terrible manager. He lucked out getting them promoted. And Fulham were much worse then than they are now. This is a different Fulham side. It's focused entirely around Mitrovic, as it should have been initially. And they play a lot more free-flowing and attacking football, focused around getting Mitrovic on the end of things. I think this is a different Fulham, a different Mitrovic we're seeing. And I think he could get 15-plus goals in the Premier League this season. So for a 6.5 guy, I don't think he's unfairly priced at all.
I completely agree. I think it's a great pick, potentially. I was just looking at his stats for the last season in the Premier League 2 years ago, and he played 1,389 minutes for 3 goals and 3 assists. And if you compare that to their previous season in the Premier League 2 years before that, that is less than half of the minutes he played. So in which season he got 11 goals and 4 assists. So that's 15 attacking returns for a newly promoted striker. You'd sort of bite someone's hand off for that. So I think he's a very good pick. Like you say, I think it's a very different Fulham team now to the team that came up 2 years ago. He scored a record-breaking amount of goals in the Championship last season. So if anyone's in form, it's him.
Yeah. And the problem is that he's competing with an FPL god for that 6.5 bracket, because also at 6.5 is Kalichi Iheanacho. I have put his name in. He's there. Another one that people have been looking at, but I'd advise people against, is Dom Salanke, because while he was good for Bournemouth, this is not the Bournemouth of Eddie Howe days. This is a Bournemouth that are compact defensively and that are not going to ship many goals, but they're also not going to score many goals. So I think Dom Salanke for Bournemouth is a hard avoid, because Bournemouth just aren't going to score a lot of goals. I'll ask for your opinion in a minute, but another 6.5, or not 6.5, 6.0, is Mbemo, who's been moved to a striker this season, nonsensically. But at that price bracket, is he an option?
I don't think so as a striker, no. I think I don't really understand how you can move him to a striker and then not have to move a bunch of other players to a forward to match it. So if he was a midfielder, then there's potential there because he's had a half-decent season in the league. But as a forward with other competition around that price bracket, I just think he's a no-go. If you're going for a Brentford striker, it's Toney.
Yeah, agreed. I mentioned him earlier then, but an option at 5.5 is Undav, who's just signed for Brighton. Just came having scored a bucket load of goals, 26 last season. So we've always said with Brighton, they can create, they just can't score. And they've had Neil Moore play up top, who, let's be honest, his finishing is woeful at best. So I think maybe not to start the season, but after the first wildcard game, week 8 or so, he could be a really nice option in that second striker position. We've also got Mateta, who is one of your favourites from last year.
Yeah, I liked him. I think he's a very good footballer. I won't be putting him into my team at any point soon. I think Undav is the better one. Like you say, the amount of goals he scored in Belgium last year was very impressive. He's got a good record wherever he's gone of about a goal every other game. So if he could transfer that form into the sort of form that you want from Brighton, obviously we know the history of XG at Brighton and how they always underperform. If they can create the chances for him, you'd like to think he's going to find the back of the net. So, I mean, another one in that same camp, the same price bracket, is Armando Broja, who, by all accounts, looks set to sign for my boys West Ham, but that gives you the Antonio v Broja debate as who's going to play.
Does it also make Jared Bowen a slightly less attractive option for when West Ham fixtures turn? Because if suddenly is Broja playing instead of Antonio or alongside Antonio, I think that limits Bowen going forward as well. So that's definitely one to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like the other ones in that sort of bracket are all fairly uninspiring. A lot of people have gone with Greenwood as an enabler at 4.5, as cheap as you can get, because he obviously played quite a bit towards the back end of last season. But that is literally just an enabler, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, and he's in my team, but he'll be third sub every week. I don't expect him to really play. Nor do I really care if he does. I'm not intending to. Well, maybe I'll bench boost early on just to get it out the way because it's
so you haven't got to worry about it.
Yeah,
that's probably the play.
Maybe I'll wait till straight after the second wildcard. I'll bench boost.
I might just bench boost week 1.
Yeah, bench boost week 1 with the likes of Nico Williams, Greenwood, and Pereira on your bench. Just
well, my current bench, Caballero obviously not playing, is Sancho, James Justin, and Awanui. So
James Justin could be big on points. He's another potential option as well. Cool. I think that's it in terms of the striker analysis. Looking at the balance, I think between strikers and midfielders, you can ultimately, to have a balanced team, afford 2 premiums. They can be... I've yet to see any good 3 premium drafts. So 2 premiums across the strikers and midfielders, assuming you are going big at the back, which we definitely recommend. For me at the moment, it's Salah and KDB. For you, it's a bit more tricky at the moment, but I'm sure you're going to pivot into Salah.
I mean, probably. At the moment, it's 1 premium in Haaland, and then I've got 5 midfielders that are all sort of gonna play, you'd think, and I've sort of spread the money across rather than bumping up and having a couple of budgets, including, obviously, I've got Jesus up front as well. So I haven't really got any budget enablers, which is why I've got more of a rounded squad at the moment than a big squad in terms of premiums, which always hate for me because that makes it so hard to pick an 11 every week.
Picking an 11 and picking a captain as well. I mean, let's be honest, most of the time we will just be going Salah or the Man City attacking asset. But I think picking a captain without Salah becomes a chore and becomes another decision you have to make. So I think that's a really tough one. The reason I like KDB is he's going to play 90 every game, and he and Salah can rotate the captaincy really nicely. I mean, you look at the first 6 games or something, they play Fulham, then it's Bournemouth, then it's Nottingham Forest or something like that. You can rotate against really bad teams between the two.
I think the really bad team you're thinking of in week 3 is Liverpool playing Man United.
That's the one. I mean, let's remember Salah against Man U last year.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, that's wrapping up our strikers and midfielders conversation. Let us know your thoughts. Maybe we're completely wrong and completely stupid. We're out of practice, so
we probably are
very likely to happen. But you can find us on Twitter at @BigAtTheBack.
And you can find me on Twitter at Higgins92, and Tom is at TomMadden92. So yeah, come and get involved with the conversation. Don't forget to leave us a like on YouTube and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get a notification whenever we upload a new podcast. And also, we are available on all your standard podcast platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcasts. So leave us a review. Let us know your thoughts.
Until next week, when we should be looking at our predictions for the season. That's going to be fun. And building our big at the back team. We will see you all soon.